Hi, everybody. It's a pleasure to be here with you today, and we're going to be talking with you about our progression over the years at the Edmonton Public Library and its Makerspace. My name is Holly Arneson. I'm the Associate Manager of the EPL Makerspace. I coordinate its operations. I work on its classes and service delivery development, and I work with the staff here at the Makerspace as well. With me as a host, I have a Makerspace assistant, Jermaine. Jermaine does a lot of help working with customers, setting up the space and the services, and has been with us for quite a while in the Makerspace operation. So as we get started today, first we're going to go through the agenda. We're just going to touch on EPL's first and second makerspaces and kind of give a picture of what those looked like, where they came from, the service model, and how we progressed as we've adjusted our makerspace service delivery over the last eight years. And how we've changed it as well. And that's leading into our discussion of the Milner Library Revitalization Project. With that project, I'll be going over how we did the planning for that, some of the considerations going into it, and I'll be taking you through our service model expansion and the new services and spaces that we're offering to the public. We're also going to talk a little bit about how it's going and some of the lessons learned over the years. There's been so many great services, so many great interactions with the public where people have made things or learned things. So we'll touch on that and how that's influenced the development of our services too. Before we get into talking about the library and its makerspace, we're going to start with setting the stage a little bit. We're situated in Edmonton, Alberta, Canada. This particular makerspace is based out of the Stanley A. Milner Library. That's the downtown and largest branch location. We have a population close to 1 million within the city. It's an expanding city. It's a young city with a population that I think 30% is under the age of 35. And it's known as a city of hockey, hipsters, and pickup trucks and festivals. So these are things that you're often likely to see being celebrated or engaged with in the city. We have government here with the provincial government. So that's a lot of the sector. The public sector is big here in the city. We have universities here in the city. And there's a lot of the oil field support and technology industry and an expanding technology and AI industry here, as well as some strong representation from the video gaming industry in Edmonton. So that's a little bit about the city itself. In terms of Edmonton Public Library, we have 20 branches, and they're spread throughout the city in a variety of different communities, different sizes and configurations. We have 3 storefront locations that are not necessarily full service, but have some of the essential services that libraries provide around holds and collections and some computer access. We have 4 literacy vans that take classes and materials to underserved parts of the city and provide great makerspace programming in some cases. And we have roughly 450 full-time equivalent positions here at the library. And our staffing complement for the makerspace specifically is drawn out of that. So that's kind of setting the scene of where we're at, how we're operating, the general overarching context of where we're operating. There's so much more that I could tell you about Edmonton and what a great city it is, but we'll leave it at that for today. So EPL's journey with making and makerspaces started in 2013, and it actually started truly in 2012 when the first direction was given to start exploring the delivery of this service. So we had, at the time, CEO Linda Cook give us a vision for Makerspace, and it was a place where Edmontonians can create. The vision included some specific technologies like 3D printing, video gaming, making books, and it was very broad. It wanted to look at creating capacity in the library for citizens not to only enjoy the information that's provided in the library and the entertainment that's provided, but also to really create a space where people could engage in creative pursuits and learning as well. And it had a very digital focus to begin with. So a lot of the technologies that we were looking at in this very early vision were focused on sort of digital media production, digital design, and maybe some light fabrication in the form of, as I mentioned, 3D printing. We started out with a 2,300 square foot repurposed AV collection space and ground floor access. And so there was a little project in 2012 and then 2013 to start getting this space set up, getting it moved in. And then we also had some dedicated staffing that was assigned to this space too. So I work in the Department of Digital Initiatives, at the time, Digital Literacy Initiatives. I was a librarian at the time when this got started, and we had a number of level 4 staff, which is considered sort of the library assistant, library technician role, who were assigned to this space. And this was a new title for the library, the Makerspace assistant role. And I'll talk about that in just a moment. So this is kind of where we started. It started very experimentally, kind of knowing that we were going to offer some services and do some exploration of what people would want to do in the library space with the technology that we made available. But really a process where we're kind of dipping our toe in to begin with and figuring out how this is going to work, how it's going to be delivered, what kind of resources we're going to provide, and how we're going to make that happen. So I mentioned the Makerspace assistant role, and I think it's really important to really acknowledge that makerspaces are about people. They have space, they have equipment as well, but at their core, makerspaces are about people. And I wanted to highlight the people who are hiring into the makerspace and the people who are working in the makerspace to support the public. So these are folks who sometimes have worked previously in the library system, here maybe in other roles like paging or even our library assistant role. But sometimes there are folks who are coming to us from backgrounds that don't necessarily traditionally show up in libraries as much. I mean, the library is a really evolving organism, so things are changing over time. But, you know, we've had folks who maybe have more of an industrial design background, or have maybe worked as a shop teacher in the past, or someone who's a mechanical engineer, many different kinds of backgrounds that we're looking at in looking at the makerspace role. It's a role that's a little bit more focused on the work and the delivery of learning and support around the particular technologies that we're offering access to. So these are a few examples. I have Jermaine here, I have Zane and Jenny, and each person on our team really brings something special to the table, and some deep experience in some cases, but also a breadth of technology and a real excitement for learning and for supporting others in learning, and generally in sharing the opportunities that these technologies that we have bring, and things that people may not have thought of. So the Makerspace Assistant, that's an essential part of our Makerspace operation here at EPL, and we've expanded the complement over time to match a growing service. So I mentioned space as well. This is another part of EPL's approach to providing makerspace services, is dedicated space. So I mentioned that 2,300 square foot space. This is a look at our original space. Again, a kind of a repurposed space, an open ceiling. We have a lot of things where we can be open and flexible. The furniture can be moved around on wheels. Power can be dropped from the ceiling. These are some of the principles that we looked at and that we still continue to integrate into our spaces today. Technology, as I mentioned, is another part of the vision for these services at EPL. And as I mentioned, our initial vision sort of set out 3D printing as a technology, the book machine as a technology. We also were providing iMacs with high-end creative software, as well as some access to robots and circuitry, Little Bits, Dash and Dot, Lego robots as well. So these are a few services that we were building around these particular technologies. A really interesting one is gaming, that's been included, and we weren't necessarily sure how that would fit at first, but it ended up being a really strong source of community connection and positive conversation for the makerspace. So gaming has now, in our latest iteration, spun off into its very own service in our gamer space, but it was part of the early sort of exploration of what making services might look like at EPL. I love this picture. This is from one of our very first years of operation, and I love this picture because it really shows kind of the reactions that we get from the public when we're showing them the space and walking them through a makerspace here for the first time. There's the delight, the awe that this technology is available, and that it's available at the library, often for free with your library card. And there's also wonder too. Sometimes folks haven't seen some of these technologies in person, and so it's a real wonder to be able to present that to them and engage them with it. In terms of technology, we are situated in a library with an IT department. There's public computing and photocopying and some other technology services that are provided. But technology selection has been a big part of putting our maker spaces together. And so some of the key principles that we've started out with in the very early iterations of the makerspace were technologies that allowed for a low input interaction that yielded a high reward. So something where someone could take a few minutes, engage with a tool, make some progress, get that tool to, if it's a little bit circuit, like light up, make a sound. If it's a robot, maybe drive it around a little bit, but something that also would be supporting in-depth engagement. So the Lego robots are a really good example. There are ways in which we ended up building a 2-minute or 5-minute quick bot that customers and staff could put together really quickly for that quick engagement, and then have the experience of driving it around, or maybe pushing buttons to make it move forward. But we were also able to deliver full classes on how to code these robots, as well as an ongoing Saturday afternoon drop-in where staff would be available to help with that. So really a lot of in-depth engagement. I love this picture because this group of young customers came successive weeks in a row, building through the different builds that were suggested and recommended out there, trying out different sensors, learning how to code them. And it's a great example of how we were complementing also what is happening in formal learning environments like the school system. They were showing up on a Saturday morning to engage in this and making progress and learning more, and even sometimes showing us new things. So just a really great example of a technology that works well in our space. The third dimension is something that's kind of intriguing, cutting edge. I mentioned something, the function of having access to things that are not necessarily available otherwise. So that's another aspect of this, a way of introducing technology through demonstration or engagement to the public. So that's another principle that we started out with in terms of our selections for the makerspace. In terms of our service model for this space, in the early iterations of it, and still today, we take the approach that, we have the equipment here, we have the space here and the resources. Staff are not necessarily experts in the technology, but they can help you get started, and they're there to take that learning journey with you and support you as you move through. They're there for people to bounce ideas off of. Over time, we have had some staff truly develop into experts with technology, but it was really important as we were getting this service up and running, and also as we're thinking about offering this at more and more locations, that staff understand that it's not expected that they know everything about the technology, and that that's not really a realistic way to approach knowledge in this area either, that it's about learning and doing together. This service model also included from the beginning introductory classes where we knew we'd be introducing people to technology, and tours. So what we have here, it looks pretty chaotic, and this is certainly a pre-COVID time that's being represented here. This is probably from 2015. This is a tour, a group tour that's coming through, and they're doing some exploration with snap circuits. They're doing some green screen work. There's a presentation that's been given to them about some of the Makerspace's services. So this has been something from the beginning that where we're also playing a role of educating people about what is accessible, and doing that in different ways, whether it's class delivery or whether it's tours where the engagements are a little bit briefer, but giving people a taste of what's possible. Other considerations for our service model 1.0 are low barriers to access. And this went hand in hand at the time with staff mediation of technology. So low barriers to access, there are many different kinds of barriers that people might be experiencing and trying to access library technology services and libraries in general. There can be barriers around cost if services have a fee involved. There can be barriers around for their own engagement with technology and learning. They may not have space at home. They may not be able to afford the equipment. They may not have access to someone who can help them get started. Folks can even have other barriers, like even getting to different places, or just believing in themselves as a maker is also surprisingly a pretty significant barrier for people to engage with technology too. And we've seen this play out over the years. And that's why it's so important to have many different ways to engage the public. But in terms of our approach to low barriers to access with this particular makerspace and getting it started over the first few years, we really found that keeping the costs low for for services where we were charging for the materials that were used in the service, so 3D printing is an example, later vinyl cutting was an example, keeping that just at the cost recovery level, not charging for staff time, not charging for machine time. And also staff mediation was an important part of that early service. So we had 3D printers and a book machine at the time that, you know, they were great technology, but not necessarily something that would stand up to a lot of use by users who are just getting started, just learning the technology for the first time. So we had much more structured staff mediation around the services that included like a 3D printing submission model where customers would send in 3D prints and the staff would sort of do some review and then print them off and people would come in. So that was really in the early days how the services were working for the most part. We would have free library cards here in 2013. So that was great. There was not a barrier to access that. And we've been keeping classes and events free as well. So those are a few considerations. Also things keeping in mind like entry level resources, providing training, having resources available. Those are other things that we tried to do to really address some of the barriers that people might be facing to get access to these technologies or to feel confident engaging. So we tried to really keep a low barrier approach. And with the staff mediation, really seeing ourselves again, taking the journey alongside that person, helping them get set up, helping them work through a particular troubleshooting issue, and helping to provide triage as we have different people coming into the space throughout the day using different services. I love this picture because this is a educational assistant who designed a set of chrysosyllabics to use with her kindergarten class, and she was going to have them basically practice spelling their names. And she was herself a language learner. Her name's Caitlin Ward. She was also learning the language and approach this as a way to not only like learn herself, make this cool resource, and also pass it along and share it with the community. So a really great example of how staff being there to support people and help them go through that journey and be there to bounce ideas off of really can help people do pretty amazing things in the local community too. In 2015, we had I call it the 1.5 upgrade. So at this time, we added our 2 recording studio spaces, a vinyl cutter, some VR services, and a little bit of a staffing expansion as well. So up to about 5 or 6 FTE at this time to help with the growing demand for Makerspace services. Our studio spaces, they're prefabbed units. You can see an example of one being used in a tour here. They would be equipped with an iMac, instruments for people to use, and also mics, of course, studio monitors, all of the things that people needed to get started. So those were a hit. They became extremely popular. They would book out for weeks in advance, and they were quite small spaces too, like only 5 to 7 people of it, really in pre-COVID times in the one studio, and maybe 2 to 3 people in the smaller one at most. And that would be really squishy. But yeah, very popular. And again, providing access to this resource for free with a library card for up to 2 hours at a time. The vinyl cutter, also a great technology, connects really well with a lot of the digital design and software that we were providing, as well as provides that sort of 3D connection with 2D to 3D design. So you could maybe do up a model in 2D for the vinyl cutter and then make the 3D version of it with an extrusion. So lots of great connections between those 2 technologies. And the vinyl cutter too is one that I think if a library were getting started, I would really recommend that they look into. It's so easy to maintain. You're looking at basically maintaining the blades and maybe a cut guard if the vinyl cutter has a cut guard, or cut mats if it uses mats like a lot of the consumer versions do. But really something where you can provide it at a low barrier access to the public, and people can make really cool things, whether it's like decals, t-shirts, and you'll see some examples later on of some cool things that have been made. At this time in our 2015 era, we were also expanding into branch support for the very first time. So our Makerspace team downtown was starting to support the branches with their own little Makerspace style services. So having some iMacs available in the branches, having some robots and circuitry resources, maybe even expanding down the road to 3D printers. So we were getting into the role of also supporting some of our colleagues in the system, providing some troubleshooting, if that 3D printer isn't behaving the way that it's supposed to, and working quite closely with our IT department inside the library to kind of help determine, is this an issue that the Makerspace can resolve? Is this like a warranty issue, or is this something about the software environment that needs IT's assistance? So lots of expansion as we start to get branches involved in the delivery process as well, and really becoming not only a customer service delivery to the public, but also to our internal clients inside the library as well. In terms of Makerspace 2.0, this is really the 2016 to 2018 era. And in this era, we moved into a temporary space. Our Big Stanley A. Milner Library was beginning to undergo a extensive renovation or revitalization over I think 3 or 4 years actually of construction and renewal. So we moved into a smaller space at first, and then a slightly adjusted space downtown, just a few blocks away from where the library would have been temporarily located or originally located. And in this space, we really had a lot of the same services that we'd started out with and added on to. So we kept a studio running in that space, had access to vinyl cutters, the 3D printing service, and a lot of digital creation. And this was a great time for us, because although the facility and the moves are always hard on maker spaces, we had a really great opportunity to meet the public in this much smaller space, to form these really strong community connections. I love the example of Marcia, the customer who's pictured in the top of this slide. She, worked through coming in to scan photos, to working all the way up into creating these huge displays in Photoshop and Illustrator, getting things printed out. There's a few other stories like hers as well, where we're helping people maybe who aren't feeling as confident about their technology skills just from sort of that digital literacy perspective, but because they're really motivated by their creative project, we have a great opportunity to get them really engaged in what's happening, and to really get to know them and help them along with their project, maybe make new technologies available. So that was our expansion in 2016 to 2018 into sort of a more, or 28 through 2018, sort of into a more temporary service phase, but something where we're expanding. I think also really important to point out, at this stage of our Makerspace's life, we've been operating since 2013. It's now 2016 or 2018. Some of our equipment is starting to wear out. So this was really an opportunity to change things up and to make some new choices, bring in some new equipment, really look at what was working and where some of the technology maybe wasn't working as well. So we did a pretty significant refresh in 2018, looking at the creative workstations that were being provided, as well as the 3D printing fleet that we were providing access to. We had a few local printers, and we had an opportunity to begin having printers basically from that would be a bit upgraded with newer technologies to offer access to in the public. So in terms of our refresh, that also brought some new principles, as we'd learned from, some equipment not working as well, other equipment being quite successful in that space. As I mentioned looking back from sort of that 2018, 2019, all the way back to the beginning of the service getting started in 2013, some of the things that were working really well from the perspective of this service and it being delivered in a public library, the services were popular. We're printing, somewhere between 3,000 to 6,000 3D objects for people per year. We're getting an increasing uptake in our vinyl cutting services. Our studios are booked solid, sometimes a couple of weeks at a time. People are really learning too. We're really seeing some great progression as people, discover a technology for the first time, or they express to us that they want to learn more about Photoshop in the case of this example, or they're motivated, as that last customer was, by a personal project that they're really invested in, and they want to learn through the technology, and they see opportunities to incorporate other technologies that maybe they hadn't planned to use into their project and learn those as well. I think also staff expertise. I mentioned what a crucial thing it has been to have this dedicated staffing, or some staffing where you have it focused on the delivery of the Makerspace. We had folks who could disassemble 3D printers if needed, clear jams, help others learn through that process, and operate with a high level of expertise in terms of providing consultation to the public as well. If someone's wondering, I'm thinking about making this model, like what do I need to know to get started, or someone's bringing a model maybe from like a CAD program that hasn't been explicitly designed for 3D printing, and looking at the options for how they might be able to translate that into a printable object. So those were things that were all working really well. Again, can't stress enough the community connections as well. Operating a makerspace over the past 8 years, we've had opportunities to work with local universities or colleges, doing collaborative programming or classes and events. We've had nonprofit organizations that have reached out to us or that we've reached out to, and we've done shared programming. We've had things like Raspberry Pi jams. We've had music workshops, a video game design class that was offered by a community member from one of the local digital arts colleges. So many community connections, and a lot of community being built among people who are using the space and people who are using the resources and interacting with them with the staff as well. So the community connections being made, and also us being able to connect people out to other makers in the community or other services as we become aware of them. Just a tremendous opportunity and a real privilege to be involved in the community in that way. In terms of areas for improvement and things that were tricky, looking back on our first sort of 5 to 6 years of operation, as I mentioned, we were starting to have some equipment that was showing signs that it was maybe time for a replacement. We had 3D printers where parts had just worn out from the heavy usage. This is a look inside a troubleshooting process for our book printing machine. It was a robot that printed books that did the perfect binding process. And we were starting to have some pretty significant challenges reaching the 6 to 7 year mark with some of that equipment. I think also what we were finding at this stage in sort of 5, 6, 7 years into the project is there are more things that people want to do working with us and using the equipment, and our staffing capacity needs to expand to match that as we're adding in some new technologies, as we're adding things like VR in for the first time, or as we're starting to plan looking forward to bringing in some other technologies, like maybe a laser cutter. That was something that the public were asking for, and looking at how engaged staff were helping people throughout the day and with class delivery, looking at really needing to maybe expand, as well as making use of volunteers and having a volunteer program running in parallel. So that was another area that we looked at. And I think one of the most fundamental areas where I saw an area for improvement with our makerspace, on top of all of the great learning and the great projects that had been made, is that the way that our services were structured, there was only a certain level to which people could learn 3D printing. They could submit the file, we would print it and provide it to them. However, by doing that model, we're really missing out on a lot of the learning that goes into, why isn't this model sticking on the first few layers? Or why did this section of the model not turn out very well? Why is there distortion on the side of this object? A lot of that learning really happens through the printing process. And I think when I look across our services, that was the biggest opportunity, was to really deepen the engagement and the learning that people were doing, and really starting to put the public into the driver's seat with a lot of the equipment a lot more. And this leads to a pretty significant change in our service delivery, which I'll talk about in just a moment. But these were some of the areas where we really saw a need to expand, and I think or to improve. And I think also just with the capacity aspect of this, we saw a need to maybe start to grow the space that the makerspace was operating out of as well, and to start to add some new technologies in. So lots of great learning, but these were kind of the 3 areas that, in that sort of 6 to 7 year mark in terms of the delivery of the service, we're looking at making some changes. So I mentioned before that our tech principles really for getting started were looking at, the engagingness of something that's intriguing to the public. It's maybe something they don't have access to in their own space, and we're able to provide access in the library. Something that is kind of a low input and then high reward tool as well, something where people can get started quickly and have a positive interaction and then kind of grow from there. And something in that lens that also provides deep engagement, opportunities for deep engagement. So those were sort of the three initial principles that we were using to select a lot of the equipment. But by about 5 years in, we'd learned so much more about what it takes to operate the equipment, even for some of the staff mediated services. So we were really looking at new criteria that were being added for our tech selection as we were moving towards an expansion. We're looking now at the toughness and the repairability of that equipment. Is it meant to be repaired? Is it robust? Is it well constructed? Does it make sense to use a consumer model of the tool for the ease of engagement and learning? Or is it something where we need something that's maybe a entry-level commercial grade application? Vinyl cutting is a really good example of where we're still actually having this discussion in a way. We're offering access to Crickets, but we're also offering access to the Roland GS24. Also, one of the things over time that we really started to look for is what kind of warranty support the equipment had and what kind of repair support. Was there local repair that was available if we couldn't do it ourselves? How extensive was the warranty and could it be extended? So these are a few things that we were really looking into, as well as integration and connection to our existing technologies. So really looking at, does it work with the Macs that we already have? Does it require access to the wireless network, and what does that look like? So those are some things that we started to build in as well. And then, is it easy and safe enough? Thinking of that opportunity that we've identified to deepen the engagement of the public with this technology that we're providing, is it easy and safe enough to have the public actually more so in the driver's seat? So these are some of the considerations that we were looking at in terms of as we're looking to refresh a lot of the equipment that's been provided in the Makerspace, what new criteria are we bringing to bear in terms of evaluating those equipment selections? And these are just a few of them. I think these are the most important ones. Cost, of course, is also a really important one. And I think that we learned over time a lot about budgeting for our Makerspace. We have, our operating budget provided through the city. We have a capital budget as well that we're able to use to refresh capital investment resources like technology and the hardware itself. But over time, we started to add more in terms of break-fix budget being available and operating so that we had the resources if we needed to effect some repairs in the Makerspace or for particular tools. So that's another aspect, I suppose, to tech selection that's really important to keep in mind. So for our Makerspace 3.0, this is our revitalized Milner Makerspace. So the building has undergone a really extensive and dramatic renovation. It's been basically taken down to the concrete and rebuilt from there. You can see a beautiful view inside the building from the atrium, looking over the second floor. And huge bellow cuts through the middle of the building to really open it up to the public so that there's a sense of like dynamic openness in the whole space. And at this time, we also have an opportunity to really expand the operating area of the Makerspace itself. So we have basically moving into a whole design and construction project. At the very beginning of that process, we have a community consultation. We do some exercises with both kind of more of a general audience that's found in the library throughout the day, but also a targeted maker audience that we recruit from the community. And we really pick people's brains about what they want to see in a new makerspace, what kinds of tools they'd like to have access to, and maybe where we can change the service model a little bit too. So we get a lot of information from that process, and we have an opportunity to expand our physical footprint and our equipment availability as well. And as I mentioned, we'd identify that opportunity to increase engagement, so to really deepen people's hands-on learning opportunity with the technology that we're providing. And this brings us into a new form of service delivery where we're running a public certification process. I'm just going to pause on that for a moment and kind of talk a little bit more about it. So the public certification process, what we're looking at with that process being introduced is whereas, as I mentioned, we had more so print submission and production style services before. And I think really the 3D printer and the bookmaking service were sort of the exemplars of this. we had started to have, with the vinyl cutter, a tool where we could really train people directly onto that tool. And we would take them through, you know, this is how you load it. This is how it works. This is how you set up the file in the software. This is when you press cut, what happens. And then this is how the weeding process works. And this is how you're going to stick it onto this new, the surface that you're intending to put this decal onto. So we had that experience now with a tool where we're really helping to have people in the driver's seat, hands-on, us helping to guide their learning, but then them leading the use of the tool in the space and working with increasing independence. This is really what we mean when we're talking about public certification at EPL. And this is the service model, and this is a service model that we wanted to build more structure around, to have more formal documentation. And this is the process that we really wanted to introduce across the different services that we were offering in our new expanded Milner Makerspace facility. So public certification, that's something that we've introduced, and we started it in September of 2020. I'm going to talk a little bit about the staff training that goes into getting staff ready for that process as well. But that's in general what I mean when I'm talking about public certification as a process. So this is just a quick view of our expanded space. So a beautiful second floor space, huge area to have different technologies in. You can see some of the 3D printers in the background. You can see one in a cabinet a bit closer. We have some demonstration technology with some gardening towers available in our space. And this is just one particular view of a space that also has 3 recording studios and a studio lab that we're going to be introducing. This is a black box flexible space for film and photography, as well as a whole fab lab. And I'm actually broadcasting to you live from the Fab Lab today, and there's a lot of tools in here that we'll talk about as well. But this is a look inside our new facility. This is something where we had an opportunity to engage in a construction and design consultation process, and to work through that construction project and make sure that there were some purpose-built aspects to how the space was being delivered. So you can see there's still some drop-down power reels available in the space. There's still a lot of furniture and equipment that's on wheels, but there's also some specialty pieces that we've provided, such as acoustical engineering for our studios and things in our fab lab. Like behind me, you can see just the bottom of our fume hood for our fab lab space and a lot of the safety features that have been integrated. So we're really aiming with this new building to expand the service space available to deliver more services, or to deliver those services that were working well in a much expanded capacity, but also taking an opportunity to do some purpose-built design and delivery of that space too. So this is our brand new second floor Milner Makerspace. It looks even a bit different from when this picture was taken. Things have moved around since then as we've learned a little bit more about how the space needs to be set up to operate. Of course, we've also had a little bit of disruption over the last 2 years with COVID-19. We haven't been able to operate the space at the full capacity and the full customer attendance that we've been hoping to, but we're currently in a period where we're having a lot more services being added at this moment and more capacity being expanded in the space. So that's really positive. I'm just going to have a quick look at the chat. It's great to see a few people have joined us as well. And yeah, I'll be happy to answer some questions coming up too on this space. So just kind of taking you through the staffing model. With this new expanded space, we're really expanding the staffing as well. And we do have some additional staffing. So we had originally, I mentioned, started with a 3.45 FTE. We're now up in the 9 FTE range. There's 12 positions that are planned for this service, not counting myself, a manager, and a couple of librarians supporting this space, as well as my manager as well. We're looking right now in terms of the minimum staffing to support the delivery of services in this space, and that public certification model that I mentioned, being 2 staff at any given time being scheduled, and this is for delivering in-person services. We've also found that in practice, really, it can often take more than 2. It's probably 2 is the absolute minimum, and we're looking more so at 3 at any given time, just to deliver, again, in-person services at their current level without all services running, and then virtual bookings and appointments, and I'll talk about those in a moment. And then we're looking at a minimum of 3 staff, as I mentioned, to run some of these services in parallel. I think eventually our staffing requirement is going to go up to probably a minimum of 5 staff at any given time, in order to ensure that there's safe supervision in our Fab Lab space, which has slightly more dangerous equipment and requires more training and supervision with the public. But that's kind of what we're growing towards right now. And that's kind of our current planning process. So in terms of the training models, I have a couple of examples here of how we're training staff to get ready to deliver services in this space. And we are currently operating 5 of our services. I'll talk about that in just a moment. But in terms of how we're getting staff ready to operate the space, there's about 3 different models that we've been drawing on. So in many cases, as I mentioned, our staff are drawn from a pretty diverse background in terms of their domain knowledge. We have some industrial designers, we have some folks who have arts or history degrees, which is more typical of library staff. We have former teachers in the space and visual artists. And so sometimes we're able to look at having someone do a deep dive and to iterate on that learning. Maybe they've used Photoshop before, and now they're doing a deep dive to get a lot more acquainted with how to use Photoshop or Illustrator to produce photos. And sometimes that can be a paired process, as you can see in the third example, but really making sure that staff are getting time to dig in on particular areas and even pilot a class in support of that at the end of that digging or that deep dive process, sharing that knowledge either with other staff or with also the public. So that's one of our models. Another model is sometimes we just have an opportunity and we've had a chance to hire somebody into the team that does have really deep experience. We have a staff member who has worked as a photographer professionally, or another staff member who's worked as a carpenter professionally, and then we're able to have them in the space and they're able to really easily step into a training role for some of our other team members and for the public as well. And then I think the third one is really that structured peer or pair learning. So here we're really looking at pairing people up and moving them into progressively increasing roles of responsibility. So just from an example of delivering a 3D printing class virtually, which is something that we've been doing, having somebody start in the observer role, observe how the class goes, go along with it, having somebody move into the moderator role where they're helping to support maybe the lead of the class, and then moving them progressively into either co-hosting or fully leading that class. So we're using scheduling, we're using coverage from, sometimes we're borrowing some coverage from either our division or from other areas to help support that, but really making sure that we're setting that time aside for these 3 different structures, leveraging different experience to deliver. And next, this is an example of our laser cutter that we're going to be offering to the public. So again, this is an example of a staff member who maybe doesn't have a ton of background in this area to begin with, but certainly had a passion for Photoshop and also a passion for cats, it must be said. And this is where they've worked in either a paired up model or on being assigned that kind of deep dive time to work through learning and documenting a process, and then progressively sharing that with other people on the team and with the public as well. So since we've done this deep dive, this staff member has developed a couple of different classes and delivered them virtually to the public on laser cutting in anticipation of how we might have people increasingly interacting with this, and as we're getting ready to launch the access to this service through more of that certification and booking model. The CNC, that's another one where we're going to be providing access to a CNC, a benchtop mill. And again, here we have an opportunity to have a little bit of deep domain expertise. We have a couple of people on the team who have experience in either a wood shop or working in carpentry, and they're able to help fill in. And sometimes it's really great because the team will be taking digital design experience from 3D printing and then applying it to a new technology such as the CNC mill. So in terms of our service expansion so far, we have 5 services that are currently operating for the public. We have our 3D printing service, which is being delivered online. We have, and also in person, and we're directly training people and certifying people to come in and use the equipment. What that looks like is someone arrives for their appointment. We've done a little bit of pre-work with them to figure out how long it's going to take. And we're helping them with sort of a preview as well. Sometimes we're doing some assessment of whether the model looks like it's going to print and advising them. But essentially, when they're coming in for their appointment, we're having them load the 3D printer, load up the job, press print. We're helping them if there's an issue. We're helping to unload the prints if they're not available at the time that the print finishes. Our vinyl cutting also now has a certification process attached to it. So we have basically a 30-minute training that people take the first time that they're coming in to book that service. And we take them through safe operation of the tool and also kind of the how to get started and the different parts. We have them make an example project so that we know that they can use the equipment safely. And then we're getting them up and running with the project that they wanted to make. Or in some cases, we're just showing them how the technology works with that certification training process. Similar approach with our studios. We have a couple of recording studios currently operating. Those are bookable for up to 2 hours at a time and free with library cards. And we do a 10 to 15 minute training and certification process with people the first time so that they're pretty clear on the expectations for the space. They know they can ask us for help and they have some familiarity of how the space is set up as they're stepping into that for the first time. As well, providing access to high-end creative workstations with our iMacs, Adobe Creative Cloud, all apps, Fusion 360, and a number of different music editing and music making softwares for music as well. We'll be expanding to add that VCarve Vectrix, I think is the name of the software, but we'll be adding a introductory VCarve program to support use of the CNC mill as we get closer to launching that service as well. So we have a few services that are currently up and running. We're hoping to expand to include more services, including our Fab Lab space, which has a laser cutter, soldering workstation. You can see behind me, we have the laser cutter, and then on this side, we have the CNC mill, and some basic woodworking tools as well, such as a scroll saw, a drill press, and a hand sanding station as well with a downdraft table. There's also going to be a new bookmaking tool chain. I'd mentioned the book robot that we had kind of reached its end of life, and so we have a small self-publishing tool chain here for making perfect bound books. And we're going to be teaching people in workshops how to basically either make a soft cover book or a hardcover book, and a lot of the actual physical binding parts of that process as well. So we're really excited about introducing that. In terms of what we've been able to deliver, I mentioned our 5 services, and I'm just going to get started in talking about our 3D printing service as an example. And again, this is an example of our certification process. So we had a closure at the beginning of this year, just related to the overall situation with COVID-19 in the province. And we switched our 3D printing service, which had previously last year been operating in person, as I mentioned, with people coming in, learning how to use the equipment and then delivering it. We switched it totally over for a while to a virtual service. And so this is how we were providing that service. We were having people who had taken the online training, which is about 1.5 hours over Zoom. And we were basically having them meet us for an appointment on Zoom. And we would do the slicing review with them, get the job started, take them through the process again of the staff member loading the 3D printer, getting the print started, and streaming the first few minutes of the print, hoping to really keep in their minds fresh the procedures that we've tried to cover it with them in the training, so that when they're able to come back into the library, they're able to get started and it's not too fuzzy. It's still a little bit fuzzy if someone hasn't done something hands-on in quite a while, but hoping that this model helps kind of provide continuity and access to the service, but also helps keep the procedures of how to operate the 3D printer fresh. In terms of the service details, I mentioned a little bit about it before, but we're doing the direct training. Customers are operating the 3D printers in person or virtual appointments. We're doing a cost recovery model where we're charging 10 cents per gram. And we have limited days of operation for this service at the moment. So we're operating Thursday through Monday, and then we're taking Tuesday and Thursday to really have a look at the equipment. Is there any maintenance that needs to be done? Is there any troubleshooting and investigation that needs to be done that we can follow up on in this Tuesday and Wednesday? So we're ramping up, I think, into a fuller offering, maybe shooting to offer it for all of the days the library is open, but so far we've been proceeding a bit more slowly, especially with having the public operate the 3D printers for the first time and just wanting to kind of step up into understanding how that changes the wear and tear on the equipment and what things we might need to plan for, or what things we might need to plan to address as the printers are being operated. So that's kind of the service detail and an example. This is a screenshot from one of our Zoom training classes where we're teaching people everything from, again, the basic safety principles and how best to 3D print an object in terms of like what makes it a 3D model printable, to good spool management. You know, anybody out there who runs a 3D printing service knows that once you get a crossed over tangle in your spool, it can be quite a devilish situation to try to track down. So really making sure to take the public through that really intentionally and really deliberately, and helping to create this really knowledgeable user base over time where people will be able to use things with increasing success and increasing independence as well. Some of the notable projects that we've had this year with this service so far, we have this project which a customer designed, I believe in a CAD, possibly even an OpenSCAD for this particular project. And this is from Spring. This is a seed distribution appliance so that the customer is able to print or to basically distribute seeds in the planting very evenly. So that's a really cool example of something that has been made by a community member. And also in keeping with the gardening theme, we had a customer make these really wonderful garden stakes. And this is another one where, you know, there was a little bit of consultation work done, and then the customer was printing this virtually, and we sent it out at that time for curbside pickup. So those are a couple of examples of things that people are making in our current service model, where we are really having people do that direct operation, or really having a lot of agency and ownership of the process through the virtual appointment model. Another thing that we've been doing is virtual classes in our newly expanded space. And particularly this is a response to kind of some of the challenges over the past 2 years with COVID-19 and just the changes of our operational environment, where sometimes we haven't been able to be open to the public. But this is an example of where we're trying to bring the Makerspace to people's homes, and we're actually continuing that. Even though we're open for the public right now, we're continuing to run weekly virtual classes. So here we were making the gardens, we're continuing with the gardening theme, and we're making the gardens of the guardian, and guardians of the garden. In this case, they're little 3D printed models that kids were designing. We did a bunny design program with kids from 10 to 12 years old, and that was a really successful start to that particular model of service delivery, kind of having them come up with designs based on a template, and then moving to more free form and imaginative types of design, combined with kind of what makes a good design for the 3D printing process. And also doing a little bit with some of the new tools that we don't have access to here yet, but are planning to introduce access to later this year or early next year. So this is a, Jermaine, my colleague here, actually did a 3D printed design class for dice design. So we were making custom D6 and then printing them off with the resin printer as a demonstration of what's possible with the technology, moving towards introducing a certification and booking process for that tool, as I mentioned. I mentioned before our staff member Jasper, who'd been doing sort of the deep dives on the laser cutter. This is an example of something that a customer made in one of their classes. We did a paper lantern laser cutting class online where people would learn to do the designs in Tinkercad, and then we would have a laser cut paper lantern produced as a result. This customer was just over the moon with how their lantern turned out. We sent again this out for curbside pickup at the time, and a great way again to provide an interactive showcase for a technology that, you know, just given some of the delays over the last couple of years, we haven't yet been able to introduce in its public certification and bookable form, but something that we're hoping to bring soon, and providing that little teaser or that little early showcase of what's possible with the technology. As well, I'd say one of our biggest hits has been a vinyl cutting design class that we've been delivering online as well. And in person, we've run this class in the past. This is our teddy bear t-shirt design class. So this is again for kids. We've been having kids bring their stuffy, introduce their stuffy to us, and come up with a design just for their stuffy. Staff have helped to translate that design into this garment, as you can see, using our heat press and vinyl cutters. And this is something that we're hoping to do with kids when they arrive in person and run as an in-person class as well soon. We've done this one in the past and it's been really successful. I think actually we're going to be even more successful with our new training process in place as we start to get back into this in person. But a really great example of a class that worked really well and really brought the Makerspace to people's homes at a time where the library wasn't open. Other examples of things that we've been doing are butterfly designs similar to our bunny. This is a proud parent sent in this photo for us after their children made these butterflies for the class, and a backpack charm design class, which is a little bit more involved in terms of the geometries that were involved and how the designs had to connect together. So a great example of kind of taking something more simple like the butterfly design that's a little bit more 2D and more manageable, and then moving into something where there's a little bit more complexity around fitting the parts together. We also did a similar twist on the teddy bear t-shirt class. This was Unbelts donated some masks to our Makerspace. And so we ran a class where basically kids would design a mask and then we would produce a set of masks for the family and send them out for curbside pickup. So this is another example of providing sort of that interactive showcase around the vinyl cutting technology. Since we've reopened to the public, the vinyl cutting service has been one of our most popular, and I believe it may be one of our most successful since opening in our newly expanded space. We're seeing kids and families in here on the weekends, friends as well. We're seeing small business coming in and trying things out, people who are maybe getting started with something for the first time or thinking about going into a t-shirt design business or making their art available through Etsy or things like that. So lots of engagement around the vinyl cutter, and just so exciting to see what people are doing with the technology. This is a little behind the scenes look. So an interesting aspect to this is we're leveraging to offer these classes a lot of technologies that were planned for other reasons or other uses. So this is a view from our children's Makerspace on the main floor, and we had a smart board there. It was originally intended to be used for instruction, but here we're leveraging it as a way to basically put the audience of the teddy bear t-shirt class up in the main view where the presenter is looking directly at them and is able to have that engagement with them as the class is going on. So we're also using some of our Studio Lab equipment for our film and photography space to deliver the camera angles and the different views. So that's kind of an example of what's happening here, how we haven't been able to have the public in our space. We've been leveraging the resources that are here to deliver experiences for them. And we're really excited to have the public back into these spaces as well. We've been receiving really, really great feedback from the public. The teddy bear t-shirts, this is just a couple of examples of, things that have been shared with us online about people's experience of participating. We just love to see, and we see this in our adult customers here in the Makerspace too, but we love to see that sense of ownership and pride that we're seeing in these examples where kids are showing off their design and seeing it come to life. And we just, that's why we're doing that. This is really about connecting the community with these experiences and with these opportunities to learn and to express their creativity. And this is my last one that was sent in. I absolutely love this this caterpillar design. This is kind of a good example of how the staff member as well has translated the picture of the design and the original design as drawn by the child into a simple vinyl cut design, and something that we could take to a number of other processes. This is a design that could be milled out of a piece of wood. This could be laser cut onto an object as well. And sometimes it's really fun to show both kids and adults in the Makerspace the possibilities in terms of different ways that design might come to life, different ways of imagining their work in different media. So our next steps, as I've been mentioning throughout, are really finding that opportunity now to activate all of our services, including the Fab Lab, really looking at the logistics for delivering these services and finding that balance, when staff are delivering certifications, when we're running classes, how many services can we have running at the same time? We're running about 5 right now. We have about 13 different tools that we have planned to integrate into services. So quite a ways to go still, and making sure that we're taking time to provide those training opportunities and structures for staff so that we're ready to deliver these services and staff feel confident helping people with these as well. And that is my presentation for today. I know it was great to have so many of you join us and to have you kind of sharing what we've been doing. I'm just wondering if we have any quick questions before we sign off for today. We did get a little bit of a late start, but I have definitely a few minutes here if anybody has any questions.
Hi, I'm Claire from Australia. I'm just about to set up a Fab Lab actually connected to one of our libraries. And yeah, with the staff training, like how many hours do you think it's taking for them to train up on, like, for example, the laser cutter? How many hours do you think they've spent getting themselves sort of prepared?
So that's a really great question. And it's one that I have really been digging into and have done some estimation around. So one of the things that I haven't really touched on is that over the past couple of years, we have added a ton of safety framework to what we're doing in the Makerspace. Before, we were not necessarily being held to some of the requirements around documentation, training, and procedures that I think really looking at our OHS legislation, or our occupational health and safety legislation, really we needed to stretch towards. So we've done a lot of work on building a lot of basic safety documentation. Having that documentation in place, to address your question, what we're finding is that it's taking generally between 3 to 4 hours to have staff read through the OHS documentation that's been prepared, including the SDS sheets for if there are products that are being used. And then for an introductory, like just getting started, one staff member who's more expert introducing the technology to a small group of others, that's generally a 3-hour session to begin with. That is generally a 3-hour follow-up session if we're doing something that's a bit more advanced. And then it's anywhere from 10 to 20 hours of practice through working through different projects. So for a staffing complement of about 12 people, and not all of our positions are filled yet, but we're up to 10 at this point. We're looking at around 1,000 hours over the next year to really make sure that everybody is fully trained and to build towards that. And I think that's going to be done in balance and also working alongside the public too. So that 10 to 20 hours, it could be, that we're setting aside 2 hours or an hour or half an hour here and there for someone to dig into a tool really specifically. But it could also be counting the time of or considering the time of delivering an introductory workshop and then helping people through a hands-on experience. So in our forthcoming sort of framework for this service and for expanding this service, we're looking at sort of 3 different tiers of responsibility and engagement for staff. There's what we're calling sort of core training, which is where staff are just engaging with learning how to use the tool safely. And that's about that 6 hours of safety documentation and any supporting documentation, and then basic practice led by an expert for the first time. And then it's moving up into more of a facilitation role. So facilitation training is the second. So that's where you're moving into the role of supporting customers and supporting others in their learning, or you're maybe delivering classes. And then the third level is what we're tentatively calling a service training. And that's where you're able to basically provide in-depth training to a new staff member on the delivery of this service. You're able to often do repairs or advanced troubleshooting or escalation of troubleshooting to maybe warranty or manufacturer level, working with myself. So that's kind of what we've charted out for a group of 10 over the next year. And it's a process where you know, I mentioned that we have 5 services right now. We've launched the 5 services first that we are the most confident about in terms of staff already being at that level of training or having the capacity to quickly train others and bring others up to that speed. And again, this is for a service that spans 10,000 square feet and has around 13 different tools or services that it's providing access to. So I hope that helps. Yeah, thanks, Claire. And that's really exciting to hear a new Makerspace and new Fab Lab coming to life.
Yeah, thanks. That was really good. Yeah, it's always interesting. I think the biggest challenge we're facing is, yeah, how are we going to staff this with limited resources? And we are actually also looking into volunteers as well, who might be out there in the community and have time and have that expertise that we currently don't have in-house.
Volunteers are a great resource for any community. It's such a great way for people to get engaged. At EPL, because of our scale here and just the scale of this operation, we haven't necessarily put volunteers into roles where they're necessarily like teaching people how to use 3D printers as an example. But I know that there are many successful makerspaces out there that are using that really community-led approach where it's the community members who are helping other community members. And I think there's really great aspects to that as well. That can be really wonderful. I totally appreciate the challenges and you know, as mentioned, over 8 years we've been able to build to this level. When you're just getting started, it's about you know, providing those kind of proof of concept services that work really well, and then building the case over time for expansion of services, and particularly when you're adding new tooling into the mix. So yeah, best of luck.
Thanks.
Any other questions? Well, folks, thank you so much for taking the time with us today. If you missed the first half of the presentation, you can always, I think, catch the recording. I know this session has been recorded. Also, feel free to reach out if you have any questions or you'd like to connect or you'd like examples of documentation. We're happy to help other libraries and other institutions that are taking this creative journey with their communities. And if we can provide a little bit of help, we also love learning about other practices from other areas as well. So do reach out if you'd like to ask more questions or something pops to mind that you'd like to bounce off of us. And thank you so much for spending the time with us today. All right, have a great rest of your day, everybody. Bye for now.